whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
I do not have sexual relations. You know, a lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat.
Hello, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Ciadello.
This week, the Republican campaign veterans trying to take down Donald Trump. Our guest, Rick Wilson from the Lincoln Project.
Speaking of veterans, did the president really disparage America's war dead? That's the big story of the week, so let's break it down. Break it down.
President Trump this week denied saying Americans who've died in war are, quote, suckers and losers. That was the explosive claim made by unnamed sources quoted by the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg. Goldberg says Trump cancelled a visit to a US war cemetery outside Paris in November 2018 because he feared his hair would become dishevelled in the rain. This is how it was reported at the time.
This afternoon, at an American cemetery northeast of Paris, the president's absence was notable, missing a scheduled visit to honor fallen U.S. soldiers from the Great War.
And the official reason?
Mr. Trump was scheduled to go by helicopter, not motorcade. But the White House said poor visibility meant he could not make the 100-mile round trip on Marine One.
Not true, according to no less than 4 confidential sources who claim to have been part of discussions on the day. Trump could have attended, but reportedly said, quote, "Why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers." And separately referred to Marines killed in the Battle of Belleau Wood as, quote, suckers for getting killed. The president strenuously denied the report.
It was a totally fake story, and that was confirmed by many people who were actually there. It was a terrible thing that somebody could say the kind of things.
But soon other media outlets were supporting some of the Atlantic's claims, including the AP's James Laporta.
You know, I got to admit, when I first saw it, I actually didn't believe it, which is why I started reaching out to sources.
And then, more surprisingly, Fox News.
And I've spoken with 2 senior U.S. officials who were on the trip to France who confirmed to me key details in the Atlantic article and the quotes attributed to the president.
Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden let her rip.
These statements are true. The president should humbly apologize to every Gold Star mother and father and every Blue Star family that he's denigrated and insulted. Who the heck does he think he is?
President Trump, though, says in fact he was so upset not to be allowed to go to the cemetery, he called Melania back in the States to tell her about it.
And I called home, I spoke to my wife, I said, I hate this, I came here to go to that ceremony and to the one that was the following day, which I did go to. I said, I feel terribly, and that was the end of it.
Although that's a bit weird, why would he call home to talk to Melania when she was with him in Paris, Chaz?
That is certainly odd, as is Trump saying that he didn't go because it was raining about as hard as he's ever seen, when it wasn't exactly Noah's flood out there, John. I think John Kelly managed to survive nature's fury somehow.
Well, then there came a defence from an unlikely ally under the circumstances, former National Security Advisor John Bolton.
I didn't hear either of those comments or anything even resembling them. I was there at the point in time that morning when it was decided that he would not go to En Marne Cemetery. He decided not to do it because of John Kelly's recommendation. It was entirely a weather-related decision, and I thought the proper thing to do.
Just because on this occasion John Bolton wasn't in the room where it reportedly happened doesn't mean, of course, it did not happen, Chaz.
That is true. Trump could have said plenty of nasty things about war heroes at other times, but the Atlantic story did specifically claim it was Trump's idea to not visit the cemetery because he was worried about his hair, whereas Bolton says it was John Kelly's suggestion that Trump not visit the cemetery because of the weather. So that is actually a direct contradiction. And by the way, on Fox News, Bolton went through Trump's entire schedule to show he was with Trump an awful lot that day.
Yeah, well, President Trump maintains the whole story is just a hoax, but it became pretty clear who he thinks the hoaxer might be, John Kelly, who ended up going to the cemetery in Trump's place.
I know John Kelly. He was with me, didn't do a good job, had no temperament, and ultimately he was petered out. He was exhausted. This man was totally exhausted. He wasn't even able to function.
Well, so far, John Kelly has remained silent, at least in public. Goldberg's report says Kelly declined to comment to him for this particular story, but he does quote an unnamed friend of John Kelly as a source, who also claims during a visit to Kelly's son Robert's grave, Trump said to Kelly, quote, "I don't get it. What was in it for them?" And that Kelly came to realise the president does not understand non-transactional life choices. Robert Kelly was killed serving in Afghanistan in 2010. In the Goldberg report, Trump also disparages Republicans who served in the military, including John McCain and George H.W. Bush. This is potentially a problem for President Trump. There are over 18 million military veterans in America. Trump won their votes by almost 2-1 over Hillary Clinton in 2016. Before these reports, Biden had already pulled ahead of Trump in a Military Times poll of active service members, so not a great endorsement for their commander-in-chief.
Now, although we should note that at least 10 of Trump's former and present staff with personal knowledge of the trip have gone on the record to categorically deny all parts of this story. Now, you might file those denials in the round file if you like, but we should at least acknowledge they exist. For my part, I'm going to try to untangle some of these allegations because they're all getting very conflated. Firstly, there's the allegation that Trump lied about not being able to take a chopper to the ceremony. Now, no other news organisation has backed up this allegation in any way. In fact, the AP specifically contradicted it, saying that the National Security Council and Secret Service told Trump that rainy weather made helicopter travel risky. Furthermore, BuzzFeed lodged a Freedom of Information request years ago and found an email from Trump's pilot saying that the weather would not support a flight that day. So to me, that story seems quite unlikely. Second allegation, that Trump also chose not to drive to the cemetery because he thought the rain would mess up his hair. Now, this allegation has been somewhat supported. The AP reported that Trump was told he could drive there, but like John said, Trump supposedly said he didn't want to visit the cemetery because it was filled with losers. Fox News quoted the former official saying, "The president drives a lot. The other world leaders drove to the cemeteries. He just didn't want to go." But importantly, that doesn't confirm the story. The Atlantic and these two publications might have all been talking to the same sources for all we know. But it is better than an outright contradiction, which is what we have for the worried about his hair part of the story. They had zero corroboration from other news outlets, and both of Fox's sources said that Trump was not worried about how the weather would affect his hair. And by the way, the very next day, Trump spent ages out in the rain at another ceremony without even an umbrella. You can see here his coat was getting quite wet. So maybe the refusing to drive to the cemetery bit is true, maybe if you ignore John Bolton, but Trump trying to keep his hair dry, that seems less likely. Thirdly, Trump allegedly said all kinds of nasty things about John McCain and George H.W. Bush, including calling them losers. Now, this is the only allegation with someone willing to go on the record. Ex-DHS staffer Miles Taylor says he got a call from a senior person at the White House asking what is going on with the half-mast flags for John McCain's funeral. The president is upset. He doesn't want it to happen. John Bolton also said he thought these allegations were true. And let's not forget that Trump bagged McCain out in public in 2015.
He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
In fact, Trump bagged McCain out for the same thing as far back as 1999.
I mean, he was captured.
And he flew combat missions.
Does being captured make you a hero? I don't know. I'm not sure.
So there could well be something to this allegation, although there may also be a misunderstanding, because Trump responded to the Atlantic story by tweeting out, "I never called John McCain a loser." And the New York Times said that was belied by video and Twitter recording him doing just that. And they're right. He did call John McCain a loser in public, but it wasn't about McCain's war record like the Atlantic implied. It was about McCain losing an election.
I supported him for president. I raised $1 million for him. It's a lot of money. I supported him. He lost. He let us down. But, you know, he lost. So I never liked him as much after that, because I don't like losers.
So are people just getting confused here? I'm not sure, but I do know this. There are plenty of allegations for this next part. The Atlantic, AP, New York Times, Fox, Washington Post, and the rest all have claims of Trump saying horrible things about veterans. Mary Trump's book included this claim as well.
Donnie, meaning Donald Trump Jr., was going to join the army or some bull bleep like that. And Donald and Ivana told him if he did, they would disown him in a second.
Now, these allegations are very easy to believe because this is how Trump supporters defend him. They say he at times makes callous, tone-deaf comments about American military personnel behind closed doors, but it's because he hates the wars they're forced to fight. One senior official said, "The president means no disrespect to our troops, it's just the way he speaks. He can sound like an asshole sometimes. It's his style." And that, John, was a Trump defender. So look, I'm not 100% sure of what's true in all this, but I do know I'm looking forward to the next round of army ads.
We want you. Your president wants you. Your country wants you. Unless you're a loser who's going to die. If you're interested in dying, we're not interested in you. Getting captured? No thanks. Getting injured? Not even. Only losers get hurt, and we're looking for winners, like him, and him, and him. Honor the heroes who came before us, the heroes who stayed alive. Don't make the president go to France to mourn your suctitude. They don't even have Fox News there. Are you ready to not put your life on the line? U.S. Army, you better not die, loser.
We're no longer the suckers, folks.
Well, speaking of ads, a group of anti-Trump Republican political operatives calling themselves the Lincoln Project has attracted a lot of attention this year with attack ads against the president, including this new one.
He's a draft dodger in chief who despises the men and women he supposedly leads. He insults their deaths and injuries with his contempt. He looks down on them for serving this nation, mocking them because there's no money in it. Millions of Americans have served and sacrificed. Millions more have sent a family member off to war. Only Donald Trump mocks their deaths because Donald Trump is simply un-American.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Well, Rick Wilson is one of the founders of the Lincoln Project. He's a longtime Republican strategist working for George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Rudy Giuliani. He is also, according to President Trump,
dumb as a rock.
And
crazed Rick Wilson.
Crazed Rick Wilson is the author of 2 books, including Running Against the Devil, a plot to save America from Trump and Democrats from themselves. Rick, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you so much for having me.
First, to the president's alleged comments that military personnel are suckers and losers. Do you think that this will be damaging for President Trump, or are people really beyond being shocked by him at this stage?
No, we've actually seen in some of the early polling that's coming out of this issue that it has, in fact, moved veterans away from Trump. He was already at a record low with veterans' approval rating in several recent surveys. And it is also, we've seen in some surveys, shocked suburban women, a group Trump cannot afford to lose. They understand that this guy's cruelty and bullying and the disregard he has for the people who put their lives on the line for this country. They recognize that that's not a value set they want in a president.
Rick, this issue does seem a little stickier than most in the Trump era. Do you think it is going to linger, or will it disappear like everything else?
Well, I think 2 things obtain here. One, the president keeps bringing it up and keeps picking at the wound. So that is a very bad spot for him to be in. He keeps defending the issue, and he can't seem to stop and look away. At the Lincoln Project, we're also pretty good at making him focus on things that we want him to focus on. And right now we're running in D.C. and elsewhere a series of ads like the one you're talking about, basically saying that this guy is an un-American president. We're going to continue to prosecute this case, and Donald Trump has stayed in this zone for several days now. He can't get himself out. He also can't buy himself out right now because his campaign is running on a very bad cash flow position, and they're unable to go out with like a $50 million ad buy to change the subject.
Now, I read a few weeks ago that the Lincoln Project was trying to distract Trump. I thought that was something he would do just by himself. But according to what you're saying now, what you're trying to do is actually set the agenda for Trump.
We are trying to engineer the behavior of the president. We've done it very successfully now a number of times, including, by the way, on this new issue of Trump's disregard and hatred for the service of many men and women who have sacrificed and died for this country. We are able to do that because we are sort of anthropologists of this terrible person. We understand his motivations. We understand his psychology, his brain chemistry, and how he's going to behave and react to any varied approach that we take to him. And so when we're trying to distract him, it's not just trolling him for the sake of trolling him. It is going after him in order to reset the political narrative, to force him off his game. Every day that he is not attacking Joe Biden because he's attacking us is a great day for this country.
So you have called the President of the United States un-American, and you know historically that is an incredibly loaded term, McCarthyism and everything else. Are you ever worried about going too far? Is there anything you would not say, or is it really a free-for-all as far as you're concerned?
Look, Donald Trump has no bottom and no boundaries. And there are a few boundaries we won't cross. Look, I'm not going to attack his youngest son. Okay, I'm not going to go after his kids. But this is a guy who is an existential threat to the future of this country. He is someone who has absolutely no limits, no morals, no boundaries of his own. And sometimes, Michelle Obama is fond of saying, when they go low, we go high. Well, at the Lincoln Project, we sometimes say, we go low so you don't have to. And this set of skills we have is not always, Marcus of Queensberry. It's not always, very, very tea service polite. We go out and we get in some brawls once in a while.
Are you worried that psychological warfare might now become the norm in political campaigning because of the Lincoln Project, or was that always a part of political campaigning and we just didn't realise it?
Well, no campaign has ever had a candidate at its head who was such a raving narcissist and such a sociopath. There's never been an American president who has displayed such a constellation of mental pathologies as Donald Trump. So, I don't think that the sort of psychological warfare we're waging on Trump will necessarily work on a future Republican or a future Democratic candidate. It's much harder than people think to make someone budge off their self-conception of who they are, except with Donald Trump, who is so internally weak. He is the classic bully, the classic fronting strongman. He plays the tough guy, but he is a miserable person inside. And so when we're poking at his vulnerabilities and his ego and the delicate little areas about the way Trump thinks and talks and acts, we know what we're doing, and he's uniquely vulnerable to that, and he knows it.
Rick Wilson, many thanks indeed for being with us on Planet America.
Yeah, absolutely, you bet.
Time for a check of the polls this week, and the operative word seems to be consistency. In the average of national polls, former Vice President Joe Biden has a lead of just over 7 points. A month ago, it was nearly 6.5. In July, it was closer to 9. In June, it was around 7. In May, it was closer to 5. And back in April, the lead was around 6 points. More importantly, though, for Biden, apart from a dip in early May, he's been nudging 50% the whole time. And most worryingly for President Trump, he hasn't hit 44% since early April. We've been saying for months that the tipping point state for both candidates to reach the majority of 270 electoral college votes could well be Wisconsin, a state that President Trump won in 2016 by less than 1%, about 22,000 votes. Well, this week, he's running hard on the issue of law and order.
Lawless criminals terrorize Kenosha. Joe Biden takes a knee. Biden and the radical left's weak response has led to chaos and violence, and their calls for defunding police would make it worse. President Trump is making it stop, sending National Guard and federal law enforcement to protect Wisconsin's families.
But is it making any difference? Well, in 3 Wisconsin polls released this week, Trump trails Biden by 8 points, according to Fox, 8 as well the margin in a Rasmussen poll, 5 according to YouGov, Biden leading by 5 in the average of Wisconsin polls at the moment as well. And if we feed all of these state poll averages into the Electoral College calculator this week, Joe Biden has 352 electoral votes to President Trump's 186.
But it's not all going Biden's way. In Florida, Trump is leading amongst Hispanics 45-43 in the latest Quinnipiac poll, when Clinton won Florida Hispanics by 27 points. And Maris just showed Trump 4 points up amongst Florida Hispanics as well. So all this focusing on black voters might have left a soft flank for Biden there. Nevertheless, Biden kept pushing hard in Kenosha last week, leading to an educational moment.
Why in God's name don't we teach history in history classes?
A black man invented the light bulb, not a white guy named Edison.
Now, you're not going crazy. He's wrong. Edison did invent the light bulb, although a black inventor did improve it somewhat. Still, that exchange showcased a new side to Biden that we hadn't seen before. Amateur historian.
Joe Biden's history lessons. The founding fathers were so patriotic they wore two masks on top of each other. True story. They're used to. Man, I probably already said too much.
With the polls looking a bit discouraging for President Trump at the moment, just 54 days until Election Day, and early in-person voting starting in states like Michigan in the next week or so, little wonder in the swing state of North Carolina, where postal votes went out this week. He's now suggesting people should try and vote twice.
But send in your ballots, send them in strong, whether it's solicited or unsolicited. The absentees are fine. We have to work to get them. You know, it means something. And you send them in, but you go to vote. And if they haven't counted it, you can vote.
But can you really, though? Here's US Attorney General Bill Barr.
He's trying to make the point that the ability to monitor this system is not good. And if it was so good, if you tried to vote a second time, you would be caught if you voted in person.
That would be illegal if they did that. If somebody mailed in a ballot and then actually showed up to vote in person, that would be illegal.
I don't know what the law in the particular state says.
You can't vote twice.
Yeah, Blitz is right there, Bill. You cannot legally vote twice in any state. Here's a better informed Attorney General.
To go and try to vote a second time as a way to test the system is a felony in North Carolina. Do not do that. It's a terrible idea.
By the way, for the maybe 2 Americans watching this online, do not listen to Trump. If you want to check your vote counted, most states have sites like this. This is North Carolina's ballot tracking page. It allows you to check that your ballot got to where it's supposed to go. Not that you know about that service from social media. That's where Trump was amplifying his message. Instead, you know, the message that might get some of his supporters arrested. It's news cycles like this that make people wonder about the effect of social media on understanding what's going on, and maybe those people should be worried. To the wall!
Big, beautiful wall.
These days, the way people primarily obtain their news is quite evenly split up. 18% of people get their news from social media, but 25% get their news from websites or apps, 16% from cable news, 16% from local TV news, 13% from national network TV news, 8% from radio, only 3% from print, and 1% were something else. I don't know, maybe they still use teletext. But people on these different platforms interact with their news in different ways. In the case of social media, they don't interact with it at all. This is how closely people are following the 2020 election candidates, and only 8% of social media news consumers say they're following the candidates very closely. Social media and local TV viewers follow the candidates about half as closely as most other news consumers. Maybe they're just not into the election though. I wouldn't blame them. But no, this is how closely they're following the coronavirus outbreak as well. Only 23% of social media news consumers are following it very closely. It really doesn't matter what the topic is. The economic impact of the virus, advice from health bodies about the virus, case and death numbers, how hospitals are coping with the virus. Social media news consumers in every case do not seem to give a toss. So I guess it's unsurprising that they, along with local TV viewers, seem to do worse in news knowledge questionnaires than other news consumers. And by the way, what is going on with local TV news?
Eyewitnesses say the leprechaun only comes out at night. If you shine a light in its direction, it suddenly disappears. This amateur sketch resembles what many of you say the leprechaun looks like.
Well, that is pretty solid. Interesting. Having said that, where social media really does come into its own is what its users do hear a lot of, and that is conspiracy theories. 26% of social media news consumers have heard a lot about how the coronavirus outbreak was deliberately planned by powerful people. And social media news consumers have also heard a lot more about the supposed connection between the 5G rollout and coronavirus. But here's the kicker. Social media users are amongst the least concerned about the effect of false news on the 2020 election. There, man, you guessed it, local news. I guess they didn't see on the news that we might have a problem.
Big, beautiful world. Joe Biden's history lessons. Bill Clinton was a terrific muso. No joke. That's short for a guy who likes music. I'm serious. I sniffed his hair once. It was full of fiber. It was cheese.
Time now on Planet America to head to another one of the battleground states that could decide this year's presidential election. And this week, our destination is Minnesota, a state Donald Trump narrowly lost in 2016 but has high hopes of winning over this time. Minnesota, a Native American word for cloudy or sky-coloured waters. They call it the land of 10,000 lakes. There are actually 11,842 lakes over 10 acres in size, but that hasn't got quite the same ring to it. They also call it the Gopher State, which is easier still.
Go, go, Gophers, watch them go, go, go.
Minnesota is on the shore of the greatest of the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, although it's Lake Itasca that marks the start of the mighty Mississippi. It flows 3,700 kilometres all the way down south to Louisiana and out into the Gulf of Mexico. Minnesota's population of around 5.5 million is 79% white, 7% black, 5% Latino, another 5% Asian and about 1.5% Native American. So, pretty white. In fact, only 6 states are whiter. The capital, St. Paul, makes up one half of the Twin Cities, along with Minneapolis, at the junction of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers. Made famous, if you were around in the 1970s, by the Mary Tyler Moore Show. As well as old sitcoms, Minnesota has given the world sticky tape, water skis, automatic pop-up toasters and the Mayo Clinic, one of the world's top medical institutions.
There's no place like home.
Minnesota was home to Judy Garland, Bob Dylan, Prince and Peanuts creator Charles Schulz.
Charlie Brown, you're the only person I know who can take a wonderful season like Christmas and turn it into a problem.
Minnesota also produced 2 iconic Liberal senators who went on to become vice presidents of the United States, Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale. Pioneering aviator Charles Lindbergh grew up in Minnesota. He later became a Nazi sympathiser, advocating isolationism in the face of European war. He was the one that first coined the phrase, America First.
It is now obvious that England is losing war.
Politically, Minnesota has been a safely democratic state for most of the past 60 years, backing a Republican just once in all that time, Richard Nixon, in 1972. Barack Obama won it by more than 10 points in 2008 and almost 8 points in 2012, but 4 years ago the Democratic vote collapsed, almost 10% shifting to third-party candidates. Hillary Clinton held on by just 44,000 votes.
Thousands of people turned out in a driving Minnesota snowstorm to see Klobuchar.
Minnesota's Senator Amy Klobuchar was among the top tier of Democratic presidential candidates this year and was seen as a leading contender for the vice presidency until everything changed on May 25th this year following the death of George Floyd in police custody.
Overnight, Minneapolis on fire. Protesters leaving an auto parts store in flames.
Klobuchar has come under increased scrutiny as the former top prosecutor for the Minnesota County, which includes Minneapolis.
And I truly believe, as I actually told the vice president last night when I called him, that I think this is a moment to put a woman of color on that ticket.
Biden took that advice, and so the Democrats don't have a hometown advantage. The latest polls paint a pretty confusing picture. On average, Joe Biden is leading President Trump by over 5 points. Within that, though, is a Fox News poll with Biden 13 points clear. An Emerson poll has Biden up just 3 points, and the Republican firm Trafalgar has it all tied up.
Thank you, Minnesota. This is a great state. We are going to win this state.
In 2020, Minnesota's 10 electoral college votes could still be up for grabs and may be crucial come November.
Joe Biden's history lessons. Hurricane Katrina was an inside job. Come on, man. Jeez, man. I mean, really, man.
The US unemployment rate is an interesting barometer of possible electoral success for an incumbent president. In the past 50 years, Nixon won with around 5% unemployment. Carter lost with 7.2% as a jobless rate, while 4 years later, Reagan won for a second time with 7.3%. In '92, George Bush lost with 7.4%. Clinton and W. Bush won with 5.4%, while Barack Obama won re-election in 2012 with 7.9% unemployment. So, crucially, unemployment was up in the year before the election for Carter and Bush, while the trend line was down for the rest of them, and they all won. Based on that admittedly small sample, an unemployment rate starting with a 5, pretty comfortable, while a 7 could put the incumbent into the danger zone. So, Chaz, there was a lot of interest in the jobless rate this week.
And those numbers were indeed interesting. An unemployment rate down from 10.2% to 8.4%. The number of unemployed dropping from 16 million to 13 million, as 3 million people who had been temporarily laid off came back to work. The participation rate's gone up, the employment population ratio is a lot higher. Now it's 56.5% of the population that's employed. Of course, none of those numbers are a patch on where they were back in February, but that unemployment rate of 8.4% is now well below the last recession's peak of 10%, and is in fact where the economy was in 2012, the year, as you said, Obama got re-elected. So this is picking up a little bit for Trump. The bad news is that America is still in a deep hole. These are all the employed people, and they are really less than halfway back to where they should be. That gap there is still about 12 million jobs. And every month, a smaller proportion of the unemployed are workers who have been temporarily laid off, and a larger proportion are these folks, the permanently unemployed. You see how that line is starting to climb at the end there? That is what Trump would be worried about. Also this is the change in employment for leisure and hospitality workers. That's the sector where most of the jobs are. You can see how they still have a 4 million job hole, but that comeback is slowing right down. That is the kind of graph, John, that's going to determine whether America bounces back or crawls through another lost half-decade.
Yeah, indeed. And that is all the time we have for another trip to Planet America. We will be back, though, at the same time next week, 9:30 p.m, Wednesday night.
And tune in to ABC News, News Radio, or iView on Friday for a fireside chat. See you there.
Good night.